My name is Sharon Morrison. I'm 68 years old. I spent 32 years as a real estate attorney. And at my daughter's wedding, in front of 200 guests, her new husband stood up and shouted, "Leave, Mom. My fiancé doesn't want you here." My daughter didn't say a word. She looked away. I walked out in silence. I cried in my car in the parking lot while they danced inside. The bass from the speakers vibrated through the asphalt. They were celebrating. I was shaking. The next morning, my daughter called, not to apologize. She said, "Mom, I need the lake house keys. Tyler and I want our honeymoon there." I held the phone against my ear. I looked at the lake house key hanging on its hook by the front door. The brass caught the morning sun. The blue lanyard hung still. Also, Constance mentioned it would be perfect for the family 4th of July. She said she could help coordinate. She does events like that all the time with her rental properties. Constance's 4th of July at my grandfather's lake house, coordinated by the woman whose son threw me out of a wedding 12 hours ago. I took a long breath. The lake is sold. Silence on the line, 3 seconds, 4. What? The lake is sold, Brianna. Mom, you can't. That's our family's house. Grandpa Oscar built it. You promised me the honeymoon. You promised. I promised you a lot of things, Brianna. I showed up to your wedding yesterday. Do you remember what happened? Silence. The lake is sold. I pressed end, set the phone on the table, sat there. The key hung on its hook. Brass warm from the sunlight coming through the kitchen window. Blue lanyard, Oscar Morrison, 1968. I said 4 words. The lake is sold. They weren't true. The lake wasn't sold. It was in a trust signed and filed 3 weeks before the wedding. But I didn't owe her the truth that morning. She called to ask for keys, not to apologize. She called about the property, not about her mother. I owed myself a boundary, and those 4 words were the first boundary I'd set with my daughter in 32 years. But those 4 words were only the beginning, because the lake house wasn't sold. It was in a trust, an irrevocable trust I drafted 3 weeks before the wedding, and the woman they threw out of that reception had spent 32 years writing documents exactly like it. Welcome back to Alpha Mom Stories, a channel where mothers share the moments that tested everything and the quiet strength that carried them through. If you've ever been excluded by the people you raised, drop a comment and subscribe. Let me go back to the beginning. I grew up in Rutland, Vermont. Small house, 1 bathroom. My father was a carpenter. My mother cleaned rooms at the Killington Lodge. Nobody in my family had a law degree. Nobody talked about law school at the dinner table. I started as a legal secretary at 22, typed briefs, filed deeds, fetched coffee for men who couldn't spell easement without looking it up. I enrolled in Vermont Law School at night, 4 years of classes after 8-hour workdays. I read case law on the bus. I highlighted statutes at the kitchen counter at midnight. I passed the bar at 28. I didn't inherit the practice. I didn't inherit anything except a brass key on a blue lanyard. That key opens the lake house. Lake Champlain. My grandfather, Oscar Morrison, built the original cabin in 1952. 2 rooms, a wood stove, a dock that leaned left because he set the pilings on a Saturday after 3 beers. My father expanded it in 1978, added a bedroom, fixed the plumbing, put in a proper kitchen with a porcelain sink. I modernized it in 2003 new roof insulation storm windows that actually close. 3 generations of Morrison hands built that house. The key hangs on a hook by the front door, brass worn smooth from decades of fingers, blue lanyard that Oscar tied on in 1968 because he kept losing it in the tackle box. Every Morrison has held that key. My grandfather, my father, me. I used to put it in Brianna's hand when she was 5 and let her unlock the door herself. She'd grip it with both hands, turn it hard, push the door open with her shoulder, and run straight down to the dock before I could get the groceries out of the car. My client list over 32 years farm families protecting their land from developers, resort companies negotiating waterfront easements, families setting up land trusts to keep property in the bloodline. I helped people protect what they'd built. Farmland, lake houses, family homes passed down through 3 generations. I wrote the documents that kept those places in families. I never imagined I'd need to write one for my own. James Morrison, high school history teacher. He taught American history at Burlington High for 22 years. He coached the track team. He built bookshelves in the garage on weekends, pine boards, wood glue, a level he checked 3 times because he said history teaches you to measure twice. I married him at 26, 1 daughter, Brianna. 22 years of marriage, a house on Maple Street, summers at the lake. James died on a Tuesday. He was grading papers at the kitchen table. Brianna found him when she came home from soccer practice. She was 12. I was 48. He was 48 too. Heart attack, no warning. The paramedics said it was fast. I don't know if that's supposed to be a comfort. It wasn't. After James, I became everything. Mother and father, provider and homework helper, college fund manager and Saturday morning pancake maker. I didn't date. I didn't travel, unless you count the lake house. I worked. I raised Brianna, and I spent every summer at the cabin, the one place where Brianna would still talk about her father without crying. The money I spent on my daughter over 15 years college tuition at UVM, $120,000. Down payment on her first apartment in Burlington, $45,000. A reliable used Subaru, $28,000. Medical bills after her appendectomy and a broken wrist from a skiing accident, $47,000. Groceries, clothes, trips, birthdays, holidays. The 1,000 small expenses that add up when you're the only parent writing the checks, another $100,000. Total $340,000 over 15 years. I kept a ledger, not because I expected to be repaid because I'm an attorney. I document everything. It's not suspicion. It's habit. I promised Brianna the lake house for her honeymoon whenever the time came. I told her when she was 20, when you get married, the lake house is yours for the honeymoon. It's tradition. Your father and I spent hours there. We sat on that dock the first week of our marriage and watched the sun go down behind the Adirondacks, and James said it was the best view he'd ever seen. I wanted that for her. Brianna, at 26, she wanted to open a boutique in downtown Burlington. Curated clothing, local designers, artisan jewelry, the kind of store that looks beautiful in the window and bleeds money from the register. She wrote a business plan. 32 pages, color charts, revenue projections. She brought it to my kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon and asked me to co-sign a $180,000 bank loan. I read every page. Not as her mother, as a real estate attorney who has reviewed hundreds of commercial leases and business proposals over 3 decades. The foot traffic projections were inflated by 40%. She'd used summer tourist numbers for a 12-month average. The lease was unfavorable 5-year commitment with no break clause, which means if the business failed in year 1, she'd owe rent for 4 more years. The inventory budget was insufficient for the first 6 months. No contingency fund. No plan for a slow winter. Brianna, I love you, but I can't co-sign this. The numbers don't support it. You have the money, Mom. You could just help me. I could have, but helping her fail faster wasn't help. A $180,000 loan on an unsound plan would have destroyed her credit and obligated me for a debt I knew she couldn't repay. The boutique opened with a smaller loan Brianna secured herself. It lasted 8 months. She lost $40,000 of her own savings. The lease ate the rest. Brianna's version of events. If you'd co-signed, I could have gotten the bigger loan, the better location on Church Street. You let me fail, Mom. I didn't let you fail. I refused to finance the failure. She didn't speak to me for 3 months after the store closed. When she started speaking again, something had shifted. The warmth had a crack in it, not broken, cracked, like a windshield that still holds, but you can see the line running through it. 3 months of silence. Then calls again, but shorter. Visits, but fewer. She laughed at my jokes, but the laugh landed a half-second late. My daughter decided I chose money over her. She was wrong. I chose her over money. She just couldn't see the difference. And that crack 5 years later was wide enough for Tyler Kessler to walk through. Brianna met Tyler Kessler at 28 a year after the boutique closed. She met him at a Burlington networking event, one of those wine and business card evenings where everyone smiles too hard and shakes hands too long. Tyler, 30 at the time, commercial real estate broker at Kessler Vacation Properties, his mother's company. Tall, good posture, an expensive watch that he adjusted every 10 minutes so you'd notice it. Firm handshake. The kind of man who makes eye contact a beat too long because someone told him it projects confidence. I met Tyler at a Sunday dinner. Brianna brought him to the house. He walked through the front door and went straight to the mantel. He picked up the framed photo of the lake house. Beautiful property, Lake Champlain. How many bedrooms? 3, my grandfather built it. Waterfront like that with 3 bedrooms, that's a 7-figure property in today's market. It's not a property, it's a home. He smiled, friendly, easy. Of course, I just meant you're sitting on something special. I'd spent 32 years around real estate people. I knew the difference between someone admiring a home and someone appraising an asset. Tyler was appraising. He looked at that photo the way a broker looks at a listing before he runs the comps. Constance Kessler, Tyler's mother, 63. She ran Kessler Vacation Properties from a converted barn office in Stowe, 14 luxury rental units across the Lake Champlain corridor and the Stowe ski area. She built the business after her husband died and left her 2 rental cabins she turned 2 into 14 over 15 years. Aggressive acquisitions, estate sales, family disputes where one sibling wants to sell and the other doesn't. Constance always found the one who wanted to sell. First meeting with Constance, a brunch in Stowe. Constance arrived in a cashmere sweater and leather boots that cost more than my car payment. She looked at my shoes first, then my handbag, then my car in the driveway. Not rude, evaluative. The way she looked at properties before making an offer. Constance Kessler looked at me the way she looked at a listing she planned to acquire below market value. Tyler proposed to Brianna after 2 years. She said yes. I was happy cautiously. I noticed that Tyler asked about the lake house at every family dinner. How many weeks a year did I use it? Had I thought about renting it out? Did I know what waterfront properties were going for on the current market? Every dinner, every visit, the lake house came up like clockwork. The engagement lasted 2 years, 2 years of planning, 2 years of Constance. She inserted herself into every decision. The venue, Stowe Mountain Resort. Constance's recommendation, Constance's contact, Constance's negotiated rate. The caterer, a company Constance used for her rental property events, the florist, the photographer, the guest list. Constance reviewed it, added names, moved people around like pieces on a board. I offered to help pay. Brianna said, "Tyler's family is covering it, Mom. Constance insists." Constance insists. I heard that phrase 14 times over 2 years. The whisper campaign came through in echoes. I didn't hear Constance's words directly. I heard them through Brianna, distorted just enough to sound like Brianna's own thoughts. Tyler says you're too controlling about the lake house, Mom. A month later, Constance thinks it's strange you haven't offered the house as a wedding gift. Most parents would. 2 months after that, Tyler says a real mother wouldn't use property to keep her daughter close. I wasn't using the lake house to keep anyone close. I was keeping it in the family. There's a difference, one, that a real estate attorney understands and a vacation rental broker doesn't. The seating chart arrived by email. Constance designed it. I was assigned table 14, the back table near the kitchen door next to the catering staff entrance. Not the family table, not the friends of family table, the back. I counted the tables between mine and Brianna's, 13. I bought my dress at a boutique in Burlington. Sage green, Brianna's favorite color since she was 16. She'd said it once, casually standing in the kitchen doorway after school. "I think sage green is the prettiest color, Mom." She probably doesn't remember saying it. I remembered it for 16 years. $300. I tried it on in the fitting room alone, standing under fluorescent lights on a Tuesday afternoon. I cried. Not from sadness, from the ordinary joy of a mother buying a dress for her daughter's wedding. I didn't know that the dress would become a reminder. I thought it was a celebration. 3 weeks before the wedding, the rehearsal dinner. Constance was hosting it at her home in Stowe, a renovated farmhouse she'd bought for $2.2 million 3 years earlier. Cedar beams, heated floors, a wine cellar with a tasting room, 40 guests. I was not invited. Brianna called on a Wednesday evening. Her voice was careful, rehearsed almost. "Mom, the rehearsal dinner is just the Kessler side and the wedding party. Constance wants to keep it intimate." Intimate. 40 guests, and the mother of the bride wasn't one of them. I said, "All right, Brianna." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I said, "All right." I sat in my living room after the call. The house was quiet. James's bookshelves still lined the wall, pine boards, wood glue level checked 3 times. The lake house key hung on its hook by the front door. Brass, blue lanyard. I looked at it for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called Ruth Calloway. "Ruth, it's Sharon." "Sharon Morrison, it's been too long. How are you?" "I need to transfer the lake house into an irrevocable trust, with conditions." Ruth didn't ask why. She'd known me for 24 years. We built Morrison and Calloway together from a one-room office above a hardware store. She'd watched the Kessler situation from the sideline. She'd heard enough. "What kind of conditions?" "Access granted only to family members who maintain a respectful and non-exclusionary relationship with the grantor. Standard behavioral clause. I've drafted hundreds of them for clients. Now I need one for myself." Ruth was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, "I can have it ready in 48 hours. I wasn't acting in anger. I was acting in recognition. I'd spent 32 years helping clients protect their property from exactly this pattern: family members who feel entitled to assets they didn't build, who reframe boundaries as control, who use love as leverage to extract ownership. I'd seen it in farm families fighting over acreage, in siblings battling over lake houses, in widows pressured to sign over deeds to sons-in-law with business plans and firm handshakes. I knew the pattern. I was living it. I still went to the wedding, because I'm a mother. Mothers show up, even when they know they shouldn't have to. The Stowe Mountain Resort, 200 guests, a Saturday in June, white chairs in curved rows on the terrace, white flowers on every table, roses, hydrangeas, gardenias, a string quartet near the altar playing Patchel Bell. The green mountains behind everything dark and quiet under a sky so blue it looked painted. I arrived in the sage green dress. I found my seat, table 14, back of the room near the kitchen door. The table card was printed in gold script, Sharon M. Not mother of the bride, not Sharon Morrison, just Sharon M., like a hotel reservation for someone they couldn't quite place. The ceremony was beautiful. I watched from the back row. I couldn't see Brianna's face during the vows because the Kessler family filled the first 3 rows. Constance sat front and center in ivory, a shade so close to white that from the back of the room you'd think she was the one getting married. The reception, dinner, filet mignon and roasted vegetables, champagne I didn't drink, then the toasts. Constance gave a toast 5 minutes about the Kessler family legacy, Tyler's accomplishments, the bright future ahead. Tyler gave a toast. He thanked everyone who made this day possible. He listed the venue staff. He listed the florist. He listed his college roommate who introduced him to Brianna. He didn't mention me. 200 guests, 16 tables, a string quartet, and the mother of the bride wasn't mentioned once. When the dancing began, I stood up from table 14. I walked toward the head table. I wanted to congratulate Brianna. I wanted to hug my daughter on her wedding day. That's all. One hug. Tyler saw me coming. He stood up, stepped in front of Brianna, blocked the path. "Leave Mom. My fiancé doesn't want you here. You're making everyone uncomfortable." He shouted it. Not said, shouted. The string quartet stopped mid-measure. 200 guests turned. The room went silent the way a room goes silent when something breaks that can't be put back together. Brianna didn't speak. She looked at the tablecloth. She pressed her fingers into the white linen and she didn't lift her eyes. She didn't look at me. Constance at the family table 3 feet from Brianna picked up her champagne glass and took a slow sip. She didn't look surprised. She looked satisfied. I stood there. The sage green dress, the gold script table card, the 200 faces, my daughter's eyes on the tablecloth. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I turned and walked toward the exit. 200 guests watched my back. Nobody stood up. Nobody said a word. Nobody followed me. The parking lot, my car. I sat in the driver's seat and closed the door, and the sound from inside cut to nothing. Silence. Complete and total silence for about 10 seconds. Then I cried, alone, while the music started again inside. I sat in that car for 40 minutes. The bass from the reception speakers vibrated through the asphalt, through the tires, through the floor of the car. I could feel it in my feet. My daughter was dancing. I was crying. Both of those things were happening at the same time, separated by a wall in a parking lot and something I couldn't name yet. The week after the wedding, I stayed home. I didn't call Brianna. Brianna didn't call me. Tyler didn't call. Constance certainly didn't call. I kept to my routine. Coffee at 6, a walk at 7, case law journals at the kitchen table, old habit, no longer professional. Just something to do with my hands and my mind that didn't involve thinking about a parking lot and a bass line vibrating through asphalt. The wedding dress hung in the closet. Every morning I opened the closet door to get a sweater. Every morning I saw it. Sage green, $300. The fluorescent fitting room and a mother crying from joy. I bought that dress because Brianna said sage green was her favorite color when she was 16. She said it once standing in the kitchen doorway. She probably forgot it by dinner. I remembered it for 16 years and bought a $300 dress in that exact shade. The words came back at night. "Leave Mom. My fiancé doesn't want you here." I heard them in my sleep. I heard them in the shower. I heard them when I opened the closet and saw the dress hanging there like a guest who stayed too long. On Thursday, I went to the grocery store. Bread, milk, coffee, the small economy of living alone. In the produce section, I ran into Helen Ferris, a Stowe. Acquaintance retired school teacher, the kind of woman who remembers everyone's name and asks about their children. "Sharon, I saw what happened. I'm so sorry. Everyone was shocked." "Thank you, Helen." Tyler had no right at all, and Brianna, she just sat there. Helen confirmed what I already knew. 200 people saw it. 200 people watched me walk out of my daughter's wedding reception, and not one of them, not one, followed me to the parking lot. I went home. I opened the filing cabinet in my office. I pulled out the trust document Ruth had prepared 3 weeks before the wedding. I sat at my desk and read it again. Every clause, every condition, every defined term. I'd been right to prepare. I hated being right. 2 weeks after the wedding, a Tuesday morning, Deb Hensley came over for coffee. Deb, 71 years old, retired family court judge. My neighbor for 15 years, 2 houses down, white fence hydrangeas that bloom every July like clockwork. She'd been on the bench for 28 years. She'd seen every version of family conflict a courtroom can hold: custody battles, estate fights, adult children suing parents over inheritance. She retired 3 years ago and said the only thing she missed was the gavel. We sat at the kitchen table, coffee and matching mugs. The morning light came through the window and hit the lake house key on its hook, and the brass threw a small bright dot on the opposite wall. Deb set her mug down, looked at me directly. "Sharon, I need to tell you something. I should have told you sooner." She described a garden party in Stowe 4 months earlier, late February. Constance Kessler's house, the $2.2 million farmhouse with the heated floors and the wine cellar. A group of women from the Stowe Property Owners Association, 6 of them standing near the fireplace with wine glasses. Constance speaking clearly, not whispering. A real mother would just sign it over. Sharon Morrison holds that lake house over Brianna's head like a leash. If she really loved her daughter, she'd put Brianna's name on the deed and step aside. She said it to 6 women. She said it like common knowledge, like everyone in the room already agreed, and she was just saying what they were all thinking. "How long has this been going on, Deb?" "At least 2 years, since Tyler proposed. Constance has been telling anyone who'll listen that you're controlling Brianna through the property, that you refuse to help Brianna's business, that you're too proud to share what you have." I sat with my coffee. The mug was warm. The truth was cold. Constance Kessler ran a 2-year campaign to reshape how people in Stowe saw me. She turned my refusal to co-sign a bad loan into Sharon doesn't support her daughter. She turned my ownership of a family lake house into Sharon controls Brianna through property. She didn't just plan a wedding, she planned an acquisition, and the property she was acquiring was my reputation first, my lake house second. Deb leaned forward. "Sharon, I've sat on a family court bench for 28 years. I've heard testimony from hundreds of families. I know what alienation looks like. This is it. What Constance Kessler has been doing to you, this is textbook parental alienation, and she's been running it for 2 years." That evening, I sat at my desk. Legal pad. Pencil, not pen, because pencil lets you erase and I wasn't sure of anything yet. I wrote the date at the top. Then I started mapping. Year 1 of the engagement. Constance begins the whisper campaign. Tyler asks about the lake house at every family dinner square footage, rental potential market value. Brianna starts echoing Constance's language, words I'd never heard my daughter use before: controlling, holding on, not letting go. Those weren't Brianna's words. They were Constance's words in Brianna's voice. Year 2, wedding planning. Constance controls the venue. Constance controls the caterer. Constance controls the guest list. Sharon excluded from the rehearsal dinner 40 guests, and the mother of the bride isn't one of them. Seating chart designed to isolate table 14, back of the room kitchen door catering staff. Tyler coached for a public scene. Brianna conditioned through 2 years of whispered reframing to stay silent when it happens. Day of the wedding. Public ejection. 200 witnesses. Sharon humiliated. Sharon leaves in silence. Day after. Brianna calls for the keys. Not to apologize for the keys, Constance's 4th of July plan surfaces. The vacation rental integration has already been discussed. The property transfer was supposed to happen while I was still crying in the parking lot. I've seen this pattern 100 times. In 32 years of real estate law, I represented families where one branch tries to take property from another. Farm families, lake house disputes, siblings fighting over a parent's estate before the parent is even gone. The playbook is always the same. Isolate the owner, undermine their relationships with allies, create a narrative that the owner is selfish or incompetent, then move in when the owner is weakened and alone. I wrote on the legal pad, Constance Kessler Acquisition Strategy. Below it, 5 steps. Step 1, whisper campaign. 2 years, reshape. Community perception. Step 2, wedding exclusion seating chart, rehearsal dinner, systematic isolation. Step 3, public humiliation, Tyler's ejection, 200 witnesses, maximum emotional damage. Step 4, property demand. Brianna's call the next morning, casual tone keys requested before an apology. Step 5, portfolio integration. Constance's 4th of July vacation rental rotation, the lake house absorbed into Kessler Vacation Properties. She used my daughter's wedding as a corporate acquisition event, the target my family's lake house, the method social engineering through my own daughter, the weakness she exploited my love for Brianna. I set down the pencil, opened my desk drawer. The trust document sat inside 12 pages already signed, already filed with Vermont Land Records on May 28th, 3 weeks before the wedding. I was ahead of her, not because I'm smarter, because I'd seen this before. 32 years of clients taught me to recognize the playbook before it reaches the final chapter. Constance Kessler ran her strategy with precision, but she made one mistake. She didn't check who she was running it against. August, Burlington. I drove downtown and parked in the same lot I'd used for 24 years. Ruth Calloway's office sits on the second floor above what used to be a hardware store. The sign on the glass door still reads, Morrison and Calloway. My name first. Ruth never changed it. She said once that the day she removed my name would be the day she retired. I told her she was being sentimental. She told me I was being modest. We left it. I sat across from her at the conference table. Same table where we'd closed property deals for 2 decades. Same window overlooking Church Street. But this time, the folders in front of me weren't a client's. They were mine. Ruth spread the documents across the mahogany. The irrevocable trust, 12 pages signed, notarized, filed with Vermont Land Records on May 28th. The deed transfer title to the lake house now held by the Morrison Family Trust, and the trust conditions, page 4, highlighted in yellow. She read the key clause aloud. Access to the trust property shall be granted to family members who maintain a respectful and non-exclusionary relationship with the grantor as determined by the trustee in consultation with the grantor. Is it solid, Ruth? She looked at me the way she looks at clients who ask questions they already know the answer to. Sharon, you helped me write the template we use for behavioral condition trusts. It's based on Shelburne versus Dawson 2014, the case you argued. It's solid. I nodded. Then I opened my briefcase. Inside was a folder I'd been assembling for 3 weeks. 15 years of receipts, bank transfers, canceled checks, college tuition payments to UVM, the wire transfer for Brianna's apartment down payment, the dealership invoice for her car, hospital bills, every dollar documented. Ruth ran the numbers on her calculator. She wrote the total on a yellow legal pad and turned it toward me. $340,000. That's what I spent on my daughter over 15 years, not as an investment, not as a loan, as a mother. But if anyone wants to argue about what I owe Brianna, I have the numbers. Ruth set down her pen. You always did. I sat at that conference table, a different table from table 14, a different outcome. At table 14, I sat in the back of a room with a gold script card that read Sharon M. At Ruth's table, I sat across from a woman who never took my name off the door. September, Ruth's office again, everything assembled. I stood in the doorway and looked at the conference table. Ruth had arranged it the way she arranges closing documents, precise, chronological, every page facing the reader. Left side, the irrevocable trust, 12 pages. My signature on page 12. Ruth's notary seal beside it, filed with Vermont Land Records. The deed transfer clipped behind it, lake house title now in the Morrison Family Trust. The behavioral condition clause on page 4, highlighted in yellow marker. Ruth uses the same brand of highlighter she used when we shared a one-room office. Some things don't change. Center the contribution ledger. 15 years of payments organized by year. College tuition receipts, $120,000. Apartment down payment bank transfer, $45,000. Car purchase documentation, $28,000. Medical bills from the appendectomy and the skiing accident, $47,000. Miscellaneous support over 15 years, $100,000. Every page numbered. Every receipt photocopied. Every bank transfer stamped. Right side, Pastor Glenn Whitfield's witness statement. 1 page. Type sign dated. I, Glenn Whitfield, officiant. Witness Tyler Kessler, verbally eject Sharon Morrison from the wedding reception of Brianna Morrison on June 14th in front of approximately 200 guests. Mr. Kessler shouted words to the effect of, "Leave, Mom, my fiancé doesn't want you here." Mrs. Morrison did not raise her voice. She departed in silence. Also on the table, Deb Hensley's written account of Constance's whisper campaign, dates, locations, direct quotes, names of 6 witnesses. The email from Brianna about the rehearsal dinner, just the Kessler side, Mom, Constance wants to keep it intimate. And a printed copy of the seating chart, table 14, back of the room next to the kitchen door, farthest from the family table. I picked up the lake house key from my pocket, turned it in my fingers. The brass was cool. The blue lanyard hung between my knuckles. Ruth sat down across from me. Sharon, this is comprehensive. The trust is legally unassailable. The contribution ledger is documented. The witness statement is credible. If they challenge this trust in court, every piece of evidence supports the behavioral condition. They won't challenge it in court. Tyler is a real estate broker. He understands what an irrevocable trust means. He'll know he can't break it. Then what's this for? I set the key on the table between the folders. For Brianna, when she's ready to see it, not before. I sat at Ruth's conference table, a different table from table 14, a different outcome. At table 14, I had nothing. No defense, no voice, no one standing beside me. At Ruth's table, I had everything. 12 pages of trust language, $340,000 of documented support, a pastor's sworn account, and a retired judge's written testimony. 4 folders, 1 table. And a brass key in the center that opened a door they could no longer walk through without meeting my conditions. I want to pause here. My son-in-law threw me out of my daughter's wedding in front of 200 people. My daughter didn't defend me. The next morning, she called asking for the lake house keys, not to apologize to ask for the keys. But I'm a retired real estate attorney, and I'd already put the lake house in an irrevocable trust. If you've ever been underestimated, stay with me. Subscribe if you haven't already. Fall came quietly. The maples along Maple Street turned orange, then bare, and the air smelled like cold leaves and chimney smoke. I kept my routine, coffee at 6 on the porch, wrapped in James's old flannel jacket, case law journals at the kitchen table, not because I had clients anymore, but because 32 years of reading case law is a habit that doesn't retire when you do. Walking the trail behind the house every afternoon 2 miles through birch trees and over the creek where Brianna used to catch tadpoles. I went to the lake house every Saturday, opened the door with the brass key, sat on the dock. The water was turning gray with autumn, and the mountains across the lake wore a thin line of snow at the peaks. The dock still leaned left, same lean as the day Grandpa Oscar set the pilings after 3 Saturday beers. I sat there for an hour each visit, sometimes 2, saying nothing, needing nothing. In October, I cleaned out the hall closet. The sage green dress hung at the back, pressed against the winter coats. $300, bought because my daughter said sage green was her favorite color when she was 16. I took it off the hanger, folded it into a bag, and drove to the women's shelter on Pine Street. A volunteer held it up. "This is beautiful. Someone will love this. Someone else can wear it to a day that deserves it." 3 months of silence with Brianna. No calls, no texts, nothing. Then Tyler called. Mid-November. His voice had the polished ease of a broker opening a negotiation. "Sharon, Tyler Kessler, I understand there's been some confusion about the lake house. Brianna mentioned you said it was sold. That's correct. I'd like to know who purchased it. As a real estate professional, I may be able to and traverse some reinties. The sale is final, Tyler. Sharon, that property has been in your family for 3 generations. Brianna is devastated. Tyler, I'd recommend you consult a real estate attorney. Not me, someone else. I hung up. Tyler called because he's a broker. He wanted a buyer's name, a deed record, something he could work with. He thought he could reverse a sale or negotiate with a new owner. He didn't know there was no buyer. There was no sale. There was a trust. And you can't reverse an irrevocable trust. That's what irrevocable means. November. Tyler did what any commercial real estate broker would do when a deal doesn't add up. He pulled the town land records. Public records in Vermont are straightforward. You walk into the town clerk's office, request the property index by grantor name, and the deed history appears on the screen. Tyler knew the process. He'd done it 1,000 times for clients. This time he typed Morrison Sharon into the search field and waited. What came back, the lake house deed, was transferred on May 28th, 3 weeks before the wedding from Sharon Morrison to the Morrison Family Trust. Trustee Ruth Calloway Esquire, grantor Sharon Morrison, beneficiaries, family members meeting trust conditions. Not sold, transferred into a trust. Tyler called Constance that evening. Mom, she didn't sell it. She put it in a trust. What kind of trust? Irrevocable, with conditions. I imagine Constance stood very still in her kitchen, the one with heated floors and the wine cellar downstairs. Can we break it? An irrevocable trust that's almost impossible without proving the grantor was incompetent at the time of signing. Then prove it. She's 68. She's alone. Mom, she was a real estate attorney for 32 years. She literally wrote trust agreements for a living. No judge in Vermont is going to rule that Sharon Morrison was incompetent when she signed a trust document 3 weeks before a wedding, where she walked away from a public confrontation with complete composure. Silence on the line. What are the conditions? I don't know. The conditions aren't in the town records. They're in the trust document itself. We'd need to request it from the trustee. Tyler Kessler was a commercial real estate broker. He understood property transfers. He understood deed records and trust instruments. And standing in that town clerk's office, reading the screen, he understood something else. The woman he'd shouted at in front of 200 people had outmaneuvered him using the exact professional skills he'd dismissed as irrelevant. She wasn't a sentimental widow holding on to a lake house. She was a 32-year real estate attorney who'd executed a trust transfer with surgical precision and timed it 3 weeks before the wedding, before any of them saw it coming. December, Constance hired an attorney. Reed Gallagher Real Estate Litigator Office in Stowe handled high-end property disputes for the resort community. He charged $600 an hour. Gallagher reviewed the town records, called Ruth Calloway to request the trust conditions. Ruth, following standard protocol, provided a summary, not the full document. Enough for any competent attorney to understand the situation. More than enough for Reed Gallagher. He called Constance back the same afternoon. Mrs. Kessler, the trust contains a behavioral condition. Access to the property is granted to family members who maintain, and I'm quoting the summary, a respectful and non-exclusionary relationship with the grantor. What does that mean? It means that if your son publicly ejected Mrs. Morrison from a family event, say a wedding reception, that behavior could be cited as grounds for denying access under the trust conditions. She can't do that. She can. She did. And the trust was drafted by Ruth Calloway, Mrs. Morrison's former law partner. They co-founded their practice 24 years ago. The document is professionally drafted. The clause will hold. So, what are our options? You could challenge the trust in court, but to overturn an irrevocable trust, you'd need to prove the grantor was incompetent under duress or defrauded at the time of execution. Mrs. Morrison is a retired real estate attorney with 32 years of practice. She signed the trust 3 weeks before a public event where she was lucid present and articulate enough to walk away in dignity when your son shouted at her in front of 200 people. No court in Vermont will find her incompetent. Constance Kessler had spent 2 years planning to acquire my lake house. She ran a whisper campaign through garden parties and brunch tables. She coached her son on what to say. She designed a seating chart to isolate me. She excluded me from the rehearsal dinner. She used my daughter as the instrument and my son-in-law as the weapon. And she lost to a 12-page document I could have drafted in my sleep. January. The phone rang at 4 in the afternoon. I was reading at the kitchen table an old Vermont Supreme Court opinion on conservation easements, the kind of reading that puts most people to sleep and keeps retired attorneys company. Brianna. First call since the lake is sold. Mom, we need to talk. All right. Tyler found out the lake house isn't sold. You put it in a trust with conditions. That's correct. Why would you do that? That's our family's house. Grandpa Oscar built it. You promised me. Brianna, I promised you a lot of things. I promised you summer vacations. I paid for them. I promised you college. I paid for it. I promised you a car when you graduated. I bought it. I promised you the lake house for your honeymoon, and then your husband threw me out of your wedding. Silence, the kind that fills a phone line like water fills a glass all the way to the top. You didn't say a word, Brianna. 200 people watching, and you looked at the tablecloth. Mom, Tyler was upset. He felt like you were Constance said. Constance said what that a real mother would just sign the property over. The pause was sharp. How do you know that? Because Constance has been saying it for 2 years, to the women at the Stowe garden parties, to the Property Owners Association, to anyone who would listen. I know because people told me, just like people told me I wasn't invited to the rehearsal dinner. Brianna was crying now. I could hear it, the uneven breathing, the swallowed sounds. I've heard my daughter cry since the day she was born, at 2 weeks old in the middle of the night, at 12 when she found her father at the kitchen table, at 32 on the phone with her mother. Mom, please, can we meet? Can we talk about this? I will meet, but not alone, and not without Tyler and Constance. All three of them. All three of them. My daughter cried on the phone. I heard it. I felt it. I felt every one of her tears since she was born. But tears aren't accountability, and accountability was what I needed from all three of them. Brianna cried on the phone. She wanted me to undo the trust. She wanted the keys. But I'd spent 32 years advising clients who were pressured by family to give up property. I know what happens when you fold. You lose the property, you lose the boundary, and you lose yourself. If you've ever held a line when everyone told you to bend, stay with me. The meeting is next. I sat at my kitchen table that evening. The lake house key hung on its hook by the front door, catching the last of the winter light. Brass and blue lanyard, Oscar Morrison, 1968. I'd looked at that key every morning for 40 years. Tonight I looked at it differently. I called Ruth. Ruth, they want to meet. Where? The lake house. She paused. 2 seconds. Are you sure? They want my property. They can come see it on my terms. I'll be there with the documents. I called Deb next. Deb, would you come to the lake house on Saturday? I'm meeting Tyler, Constance, and Brianna. Deb didn't hesitate. Try to stop me. Friday morning, I drove to the lake house. The roads were plowed but narrow, banked with dirty snow. The driveway hadn't been shoveled. I did it myself, 40 minutes with the flat blade shovel my father bought in 1979. Good exercise. Good thinking time. I opened the front door with the brass key. The smell hit me the way it always does old wood lake water through the window seams, and the faint sweetness of the cedar closet my father installed in 1978. He'd lined it with red cedar planks from a sawmill in Heinsberg. 48 years later, you could still smell the cedar when you opened the door. I walked through the rooms. The kitchen where my mother made blueberry pancakes on Saturday mornings, the batter mixed in a yellow bowl that's still in the cabinet. The dock where Brianna learned to swim at 6, James stood in waist-deep water with his arms out while she kicked toward him. The bedroom where James read to Brianna every summer night sitting on the edge of the twin bed with a flashlight and a chapter book. This house isn't a property. It isn't an asset. It isn't a listing in a vacation rental brochure. It's 3 generations of Morrisons waking up to the sound of Lake Champlain lapping against the dock pilings in the morning. I set up the kitchen table. 5 chairs. The trust document in one folder, the contribution ledger in a second, Pastor Whitfield's witness statement in a third, Deb's written account of the Whisper campaign in a fourth. 4 folders, 1 table, the lake house key in the center. Saturday morning, February. The lake was frozen solid, a flat white sheet stretching to the Adirondacks on the far shore. The dock was buried under 6 inches of snow. The mountains across the water stood white and silent against a sky the color of old pewter. Ruth arrived first, 8:30. She came in through the kitchen door carrying her leather briefcase and a legal pad with a fresh yellow page. She sat at the table, uncapped her pen, and set the pad beside the folders. Ready. Deb arrived 10 minutes later. She stamped the snow off her boots in the doorway, hung her coat on the peg beside the brass key, and went straight to the kitchen. Made coffee. Set out 5 mugs. She moved through the house with the calm of a woman who'd spent 28 years on a courtroom bench. She knew how to wait, and she knew how to watch. At 9:15, a black SUV pulled into the driveway. Tyler driving. Constance in the passenger seat, Brianna in the back. Tyler entered first. He scanned the house the way he always did, ceiling height window placement lake view through the kitchen dock, access from the back door, square footage calculation running behind his eyes, always appraising. Constance came in behind him, wool coat leather gloves, boots that cost more than the kitchen table. She saw Ruth and Deb and stopped. I didn't know this was a group meeting. It's not a group meeting, Constance. It's a family meeting. Ruth is my attorney. Deb is my friend and a witness. Brianna came in last. She stood in the kitchen doorway and looked around the room. The same kitchen where she ate blueberry pancakes with maple syrup running down her chin, where she spread homework across the counter on summer evenings, where James sat in the corner chair and read to her while I washed the dishes. Her eyes were red. 5 chairs at the kitchen table. I sat at the head, the chair closest to the window, and the lake view. Ruth to my right, Deb to my left, Tyler and Constance across from me, Brianna at the far end. The lake house key sat in the center of the table. Brass, blue lanyard. Oscar Morrison tied that lanyard on in 1968. Tyler leaned back in his chair. Let's not make this more complicated than it needs to be, Sharon. We understand you've placed the house in a trust. We'd like to discuss the conditions and see how we can... Tyler, I'll speak first. I opened the first folder, the contribution ledger. I placed it on the table between the key and the trust document. Before we discuss the lake house, I want to establish something. I turned the folder so the pages faced Brianna. This is a record of every dollar I spent on you over 15 years. I organized it last August. Every receipt, every bank transfer, every canceled check. I turned the pages one at a time, slowly, letting the numbers speak. College tuition at UVM, $120,000 over 4 years. Down payment on your first apartment in Burlington, $45,000. Your Subaru after graduation, $28,000. Medical bills, your appendectomy at $23,000, your broken wrist from the skiing accident at $47,000. Groceries, clothes, holidays, trips, birthdays, the small daily costs of raising a child alone for 15 years, $100,000. I closed the folder, left my hand on the cover. Total $340,000. Brianna stared at the number. Tyler shifted in his chair, the small adjustment of a man recalculating his position. Constance was very still, the kind of still that comes from not wanting to draw attention. I didn't keep this ledger because I expected repayment. I kept it because I'm an attorney. I document everything. But I want you to see the number Brianna, $340,000. That's what I gave you, not lent, gave. Tyler leaned forward. Sharon Brianna's financial history with you isn't relevant to the trust. It's relevant to the conversation, Tyler. You called me a financial obstacle. Constance told people in Stowe that I controlled Brianna through property. I want Brianna to see what control looks like in actual dollars, $340,000 of support over 15 years. 0 conditions attached, until now. I opened the second folder, 12 pages. I placed the trust document on the table beside the contribution ledger. Now the lake house. I looked at Tyler. You already know it's in an irrevocable trust. You pulled the town records in November, but you haven't seen the trust document. I turned to the cover page. The Morrison Family Trust, irrevocable. Signed May 28th. Filed with Vermont Land Records. Trustee Ruth Calloway, my former law partner. I turned to page 4, the behavioral condition clause. I read it aloud the same way I'd read hundreds of trust conditions aloud in closing meetings over 32 years. Calm. Clear. Every word deliberate. Access to the trust property shall be granted to family members who maintain a respectful and non-exclusionary relationship with the grantor, as determined by the trustee in consultation with the grantor. Tyler's jaw set. That clause is subjective. Respectful isn't legally defined. Ruth spoke from my right. She didn't raise her voice. She never does. It's defined in the supplementary schedule, attached as Exhibit B, non-exclusion from family events, no public verbal abuse, no campaigns to undermine the grantor's reputation. The specific definitions run 4 pages. Tyler, Sharon, and I wrote the template together 20 years ago. Constance's voice came sharp from across the table. This is manipulative. You're using legal documents to punish. I turned to face her. Constance, I've been listening to you tell my daughter that I use property to control her for 2 years. Let me clarify something. I use property law to protect property. That's what I did for 32 years. And I did it again 3 weeks before the wedding, the day after Brianna told me I wasn't welcome at the rehearsal dinner. The dinner you hosted. The lake house key sat on the table between the folders, brass catching the gray February light from the window. The key opens a door, but the trust decides who walks through it. I opened the third folder. The trust condition requires a respectful and non-exclusionary relationship with the grantor. Tyler, you may argue that's subjective, so let me provide objective documentation. I placed Pastor Glenn Whitfield's witness statement on the table, 1 page, typed, signed in blue ink, dated 2 days after the wedding. Tyler picked it up, read it. His jaw tightened, the muscle along the bone line pulsed, once then locked. I watched him read his own behavior in someone else's handwriting. I, Glenn Whitfield officiant, witnessed Tyler Kessler verbally eject Sharon Morrison from the wedding reception of Brianna Morrison on June 14th in front of approximately 200 guests. Mr. Kessler shouted words to the effect of, "Leave, Mom. My fiancé doesn't want you here." Mrs. Morrison did not raise her voice. She departed in silence. Tyler set the page down. That's taken out of context. I was trying to... You were trying to remove me from my daughter's wedding in front of 200 people so that Constance could sit at the family table and I could sit at table 14 near the kitchen door. I let those words settle. Pastor Whitfield has officiated over 200 weddings in 30 years of ministry. He called me 2 days later. He said he'd never seen a groom eject the bride's mother. Not once in 200 weddings. Tyler said nothing. Constance uncrossed and recrossed her arms. The trust condition requires respectful and non-exclusionary behavior. Your conduct at the wedding is documented by the officiant, a man with no stake in this dispute, no relationship with me beyond that single ceremony. If you challenge this trust in court, Tyler, Pastor Whitfield will testify, he told me so. I looked at him across the table, the same table where Brianna ate pancakes, the same kitchen where James read chapter books by flashlight. You seated me at table 14, near the kitchen door. Card printed Sharon M. I want you to remember that table number. I opened the fourth folder, the last one. And finally, Constance. I placed Deb Hensley's written account on the table. 2 pages, signed, dated, notarized at Deb's insistence. 28 years on a family court bench taught her that documentation without notarization is a suggestion, not evidence. My neighbor Deb Hensley, retired family court judge, 28 years on the bench, attended a garden party at your home in Stowe. February of last year, 6 members of the Stowe Property Owners Association were present. Deb overheard you say, and I'm quoting from her signed statement, I read Constance's words back to her, slowly. A real mother would just sign it over. Sharon Morrison holds that lake house over Brianna's head like a leash. Constance's face went flat, not surprised, caught. That was a private conversation. It was a campaign, Constance. 2 years. You told Brianna I was controlling. You told Tyler the lake house was a financial opportunity. You told the Stowe community I was a bad mother. You planned the seating chart that put me at table 14. You excluded me from the rehearsal dinner, and you coached your son to humiliate me at the reception. Deb spoke from her chair to my left. Her voice carried the measured weight of a woman who'd delivered rulings for nearly 3 decades. Mrs. Kessler, I sat on a family court bench for 28 years. I've seen parental alienation in custody cases, parents turning children against the other parent through lies, manipulation and sustained campaigns. What you did to Sharon's relationship with Brianna is the adult version of the same pattern. Constance stood. She pointed at me across the table, her index finger rigid the gold bracelet on her wrist, catching the kitchen light. You can't prove any of this. This is defamation. It's not defamation if it's true, Constance. And it's documented. 6 witnesses at the garden party. Deb's signed statement. Brianna's own emails repeating your exact language, controlling, holding on, not letting go. Those aren't Brianna's words. Those are your words. You gave Brianna the phrases. She used them, and I kept the emails. Constance sat down, her hand lowered to the table, the pointing finger curled into her palm. For the first time since I'd known her, Constance Kessler had nothing to say. Tyler stood. The chair scraped the floor. He'd been sitting with his arms crossed for the last 10 minutes, running numbers behind his eyes the way brokers do when a deal turns against them. Sharon, this trust is punitive. You created it specifically to exclude us. Any court in Vermont would see that. Ruth spoke from my right. She didn't look up from her legal pad. The Morrison Family Trust is a standard irrevocable trust with a behavioral condition clause. Behavioral conditions are legally permissible under Vermont trust law, Shelburne v. Dawson, 2014. The trust was signed 3 weeks before the wedding, documented by a notary, and filed with Vermont Land Records. The timeline is clean. Tyler squared his shoulders. We'll challenge it. We'll prove she was acting out of spite. We'll subpoena the drafting records. Tyler. Ruth set her pen down. She looked at him the way she looked at opposing counsel who hadn't done their homework. You're a commercial real estate broker. You know what irrevocable means. It means the grantor cannot unilaterally revoke or amend the trust after execution. It means what it has always meant in every property deal you've ever closed. And I should mention Reed Gallagher already explained this to your mother in December. Tyler went pale. The color left his face from the jaw up like water draining from a glass. He turned to Constance. She didn't meet his eyes. Constance hired Reed in December, I said. Reed called Ruth. That's how it works when you've practiced law in Vermont for 32 years. Everyone knows everyone. Reed told your mother the trust was unbreakable. She didn't tell you. I folded my hands on the table. The key sat between them. This wasn't a negotiation, Tyler. This was a trust document drafted by a woman who's been doing this since before you had your license. Tyler turned to Constance. His voice dropped the pitch shift of a man whose strategy just collapsed and who needs a new one in the next 10 seconds. Mom, we need to... Don't look at me. Constance's voice was flat, stripped of the polished hosting tone she used at garden parties. This was supposed to be simple. She was supposed to just give it. I let those words hang in the kitchen. She was supposed to just give it. 2 years of whisper campaigns and seating charts and rehearsal dinner exclusions and public humiliation, all because she assumed I would fold. Let me lay this out, Constance. You identified the lake house as a target, a 3-bedroom waterfront property on Lake Champlain worth somewhere between $800,000 and $1.2 million. You ran a 2-year campaign to isolate me from my daughter. You designed the wedding to humiliate me. Then you had Brianna call the next morning for the keys before an apology, before a thank you, before anything human. I paused. Your plan was to absorb this property into Kessler Vacation Properties. What is that worth on a weekly rental? $2,500, $3,000. Constance said nothing. Your 14 vacation rental properties are all waterfront or mountain view. Your acquisition pattern is public record, Constance. You buy from widows, estate sales, and family disputes. I'm a widow with a family dispute. I was your perfect target. Tyler grabbed his coat from the back of his chair. That's enough. We're leaving. You're welcome to leave. The trust remains. The conditions remain. The lake house remains in the Morrison family as my grandfather intended when he built it in 1952. Tyler reached the kitchen door. He turned back. This isn't over, Sharon. I didn't stand. Yes, Tyler, it is. He shouted 3 times during this meeting. I never raised my voice once. Tyler and Constance walked to the black SUV. The doors slammed. The engine turned over. Gravel under tires, then nothing. Brianna didn't move. She sat at the far end of the kitchen table with her hands in her lap, staring at the brass key on the blue lanyard. The silence settled in, the kind of silence that comes after an engine fades and the wind takes over frozen lake bare trees, the dock under a thin blanket of snow. The mountains stood across the water like they'd been standing for 10,000 years, indifferent to everything that happens in kitchens. Ruth touched my arm. She and Deb stepped onto the porch. The screen door closed behind them, giving us the room. Mom, Brianna's voice was small. I didn't know Constance was doing all that. You knew she excluded me from the rehearsal dinner. Yes. You knew Tyler was going to say something at the wedding. Her jaw tightened. I didn't know he would shout. Going to what Brianna politely asked me to leave my own daughter's wedding. She pressed her lips together. Then, the boutique. You could have helped. You had the money. You chose not to. I didn't flinch. The foot traffic projections were inflated by 40%. There was no break clause on a 5-year lease. The inventory budget was insufficient for the first 6 months. I refused because the numbers didn't work, and the boutique closed in 8 months. She looked at the table. I think I needed someone to blame, and you were there. I've always been there, Brianna, at the boutique opening, at every birthday, at your wedding until your husband told me to leave. She didn't respond. The wind moved against the windows. The lake was silent under its ice. I placed my hands flat on the table. The key sat between them, brass and blue lanyard, the same key Brianna used to grip with both hands at 5 years old, turning it hard, pushing the door open with her shoulder. Brianna, I love you. I will always love you. I spent $340,000 raising you. I spent 20 summers bringing you to this lake house. I watched you learn to swim off that dock while your father stood in the water with his arms out. I looked at her. And on your wedding day, I sat at table 14, near the kitchen door. Your husband screamed at me to leave. You looked at the tablecloth. Your mother-in-law picked up her champagne and smiled. I picked up the key, held it in my palm. The lake was never sold, Brianna, but it was never yours to take. I set it back on the table between us. The trust conditions are clear, respectful, and non-exclusionary. If you want access to this lake house, if you want your children to know the dock that leans left and the key on the blue lanyard, then you need to build a relationship with me that's based on respect, not Constance's version of what a mother should do, not Tyler's property calculations. Respect. I picked up the key one more time, turned it in my fingers the way my grandfather must have turned it in 1968 when he tied the lanyard on. Your grandfather put this lanyard on this key in 1968. 3 generations have held it. Your children could be the 4th. That's up to you. I set the key on the table, stood up, walked to the back door. I'm going to sit on the dock. You can sit with me or you can drive home. Either way, the trust stands. The snow crunched under my boots. The dock stretched over the frozen lake. I sat in the Adirondack chair, the one my father put there in 1979. The lake stretched to the mountains. The wind was cold and clean and carried nothing but silence. I didn't look back to see if she followed. The door was open. The key was on the table. And the decision was hers. I don't know what my daughter did in that kitchen. I was on the dock. The wind off the lake pressed against my face, and I let it. The mountain stood across the water, white and permanent, the kind of thing that doesn't care about trust documents or wedding receptions or mothers sitting alone in parking lots. I sat there for 20 minutes, maybe longer. The cold went through my coat. I didn't move. Then I turned around. Brianna was standing at the end of the dock, not speaking, not crying, just standing there, 10 feet behind me. Her hands were in her coat pockets and her shoulders were pulled tight against the wind. She was looking at the lake the way she used to look at it when she was 6, mouth slightly open, eyes wide, like the size of it surprised her every time. She didn't say anything, neither did I. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't redemption. It was a woman standing on a dock next to her mother in February, deciding whether the distance between them was something she wanted to close. I didn't know the answer. She probably didn't either. But she was there, and that was something. We stood on that dock for 10 minutes, frozen lake, mountains. The dock leaning left, same lean as the day Grandpa Oscar set the pilings. Wind off the water, steady and cold. Mom. Yes. I'm sorry I looked at the tablecloth. I kept my eyes on the lake. The water was somewhere under all that ice, moving slow and dark. That's a start, Brianna. She nodded. She pulled out her phone and called a ride Tyler had left with the SUV. She walked back through the kitchen, past the key on the table, past the 4 folders. The front door opened and closed. A car came 20 minutes later. She got in. She left. I stayed on the dock. Ruth and Deb came out after Brianna's car disappeared down the road. Ruth handed me a thermos of coffee. Deb stood beside me and looked at the lake. How are you? I'm standing on my grandfather's dock. The trust is filed. My daughter is somewhere between here and honest. Ruth nodded slowly. That's more than most of my clients get. She was right. It was more than most. It wasn't everything, but it was enough for today. Within 3 months, the consequences settled in like a Vermont winter, slow, thorough, unavoidable. Tyler. Word travels in Vermont commercial real estate the way it travels in any small industry through lunch meetings and referral calls and the quiet arithmetic of reputation. Reed Gallagher's office mentioned the failed trust challenge. Tyler became a story the broker who tried to take his mother-in-law's lake house through a 2-year family scheme. 2 referral sources dropped Kessler Vacation Properties by March. In a market built on trust, Tyler had become a liability. Constance. 3 members of the Stowe Property Owners Association stopped returning her calls. Deb's account circulated the way truth circulates in small towns, not with urgency but with weight. The narrative reversed. Constance Kessler wasn't the sophisticated resort matriarch. She was the woman who ran a whisper campaign against a widow. 2 sellers withdrew their listings from Kessler Vacation Properties before spring. Brianna. She filed for separation from Tyler in March, moved to a rental apartment in Burlington, started therapy Tuesday afternoons, a practice on Pine Street. She did not ask for the lake house keys. She did not mention the trust. In April, she sent me a letter, handwritten, 3 pages. I read it at the lake house kitchen table. The brass key hung on its hook by the door. The 4 folders were in Ruth's office, filed and archived. The lake was beginning to thaw, patches of dark water breaking through the white. The letter sat on the table where the trust document had been. Same table, different document. April. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. 3 pages, handwritten. Brianna's handwriting, the same looping cursive she learned in 4th grade, the one James said looked like ribbon. I sat at the lake house kitchen table. The key hung on its hook by the door. The ice on the lake had broken into gray plates that drifted and bumped against the dock pilings. She wrote, "Mom, I spent 6 years blaming you for the boutique. You were right. The numbers didn't work. I was angry at you for being right." She wrote, "Tyler married me for a lot of reasons. I'm starting to understand that the lake house was one of them." She wrote, "I'm not asking for the keys. I'm asking for Saturday morning coffee if you'll have me." Her letter wasn't perfect. The handwriting shook in places. She crossed out 2 sentences and rewrote them. But it was honest. After 6 years of someone else's words in her mouth, she was using her own. I picked up the phone, dialed her number. Saturday, 9 o'clock, bring the good coffee. May, Saturday morning. The ice had melted. The dock still leaned left. The water was gray-blue and flat, and the mountains across the lake wore their last collar of snow. I opened the front door with the brass key, hung it on the hook, the same hook my grandfather nailed into the doorframe in 1952, made coffee, opened the windows. Pine and lake water filled the kitchen the way they've filled it for decades. Brianna arrived at 9. She carried a bag of Ethiopian single-origin coffee. She didn't bring Tyler. She didn't mention Constance. We sat on the dock, 2 Adirondack chairs, lake to mountains. The water lapped against the pilings, the same sound it made when Brianna was 6, when she was 16, when she was 20, and James was still alive. I forgot how quiet it is here. It's always been this quiet. You just have to show up to hear it. We talked about the dock it needs reshingling. The cedar closet still smells like cedar after 48 years. Small things, real things. 3 generations of building, 1 document to preserve it. That's how families work, not by assuming, not by demanding, but by caring enough to put it in writing. I'm sitting on my grandfather's dock. The key is on its hook inside. The lake stretches out in front of me. The mountains stand behind it. I spent 32 years protecting other people's property. The most important document I ever drafted was for my own. Some people think love means giving everything without conditions. I think love means protecting what matters, even from the people who matter most, especially from them. That's my story. 1 wedding, 4 words, and a trust document that kept a lake house in the family. If this story reminded you to protect what's yours, or to call your mother, drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.